Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Audit Committee. Now, before we get going, Graham, would you like to quickly introduce yourself because you're new to this committee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm Graham Cadle, and I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Finance. Started just before Christmas, covering Bob Watson, who's obviously moved on. Nice to meet you all. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Now we come to apologies for absence.
Councillor G and Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you very much. And then to item 48, minutes of the previous meeting. Okay, Ian, would you like to go first?
I suspect a very small typo, Mr. Chairman. In item 40, the final point says included were around property, plan and equipment valuations. I think it should be plant.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We can get that amended.
But that's all.
Imogen?
Yes, in point 45, we've got here Councillor G emphasises the climate emergency audit has been requested by the Audit Committee in the overview, addition to the Overview Scrutiny Committee. Can we, there's sort of a lot of dispute over what that is and when it's happening. I just wondering if we could get some clarity on that.
I think
Chairman,
it's me. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, just could I suggest, Chairman, that I pick that point up under item 55, the corporate risk register?
Okay, yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, that works for us. Thank you. Any other points in the committee on the minutes? No. Should we take a quick vote to accept those minutes subject to the typo change? Okay, thank you. That's carried. We then come to item 49, declaration of interest. Has anybody got anything to raise on declarations? Yes, Imogen.
I raise it because it's mentioned in one of the reports. I have a bit of money in the Berkshire Pension Fund.
Okay, thank you very much. That's been noted. See no one else indicating, so we can move on. I've been informed we've had no public questions, item 50, or member questions, item number 51. So we'll pass over those. Item 52, I've informed members already before this meeting, but just for clarity for people who might be following this online, we'll defer this item until the Extraordinary Audit Committee that's happening at the end of March, because this is it's a report that's meant to be supplementary to the Statement of Accounts. We were originally going to be having the Statement of Accounts reviewed at this meeting, but since we're doing that at the end of March now, it makes sense to also defer this item. Imogen, question?
I'm okay with that, but can it be updated? Because I looked at it and it's, compared to obviously for this year, it's quite out of date, that's all.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that comment's been noted by officers, and if it is out of date, I'm sure they'll look at that before the March meeting. But we can discuss the contents of it more thoroughly then. So yeah, we'll pass over 52. So then we come to item number 53. So update on the accounts. So that's often a tag team between the auditors and between Graham. So happy for either of you to lead off on this one.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm kicking off, but I'm sure I'm going to be handing over to Graham to comment as well. And I guess my first point in presenting this, I want to be really clear that whilst it's written by EY in EY branding, we've actually co-authored it with the council and with Graham and his team. So I know that members will have read it, but just in terms of picking out some key highlights, the audit is well progressed, and I know we were hopeful in November of being completed for this committee. I think I said, sort of certainly in various conversations at the time, I said it was ambitious, and I think there have been challenges for both teams, both ourselves and the council, just in terms of balancing workload priorities and sickness. I think in fairness, we, and by we I think I mean the audit team, we maybe underestimated the impact of the delayed start and being able to get through all of the procedures. And then obviously the Christmas break never helps us. And I guess we were at the end of November when we had the last committee, and we're at the beginning of February. So there are various things within that. I think it's important to be clear that you're not alone. The national position we quote in the report, I do now have an update. So at the end of December, there was still 60% of local audits in progress. That number is gradually reducing, but it's not exactly a flurry as we've gone through January. And I also wanted to flag the points that we make in the report around the measures that we've put in place following the last committee meeting, which around how we're assessing progress and making sure that the audit is moving along, and they are definitely working. And I think we would all recognise that that's making a very big difference. So on behalf of my team, I'd like to say thank you to the finance team for their support in that. And I guess just in terms of an introduction, I'm guessing, whilst I don't in any way want to push this entirely onto the pension fund audit, even had we completed all of the work in our control, we would not have been in a position after today's meeting to have been able to sign the financial statements or to sign the audit report, because the letter that we received from the pension fund auditor, whilst providing a level of assurance, did state that there was work ongoing and that there could still be issues arising. Their committee, we're expecting them to report to committee in early March, so that's in good time for our own reporting back to you at the end of March to the extraordinary meeting. The final point I'd just like to make around one of the other elements in the report, before I hand over to Graham for any comments he might want to make, is on housing benefits. So we reference a deadline of being the 31st of January. Very late in the day, and I think I mean at the very end of last week, DWP extended that deadline to the 28th of February. So we are still working to the timetable we outline in our report. We hope to complete quicker, but at the moment I'm not necessarily going to make any promises that I don't think I can keep. But it does mean that all councils will be at least largely not completed until the 28th of February. So I can just say for EY audits, and that's all I can tell you about, I think we managed to complete 3 for Monday, and the remainder are ongoing for a variety of reasons. We have got procedures in place to monitor progress on the housing benefits audit in the same way that we do for the council, just slightly different teams involved. I think that's probably what I wanted to say in terms of introduction. Graham, I don't know if there is anything that you would want to add from your perspective.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair. So to reiterate Helen's comments about a joint position and a joint report, just say that before I came to Woking, in December, I was at another authority up north, and it's in exactly the same position with exactly the same challenges. So I think, as Helen's outlined, this is not unusual at the moment for local authorities, and obviously as times push on, it clashes into other activities for finance teams, such as budget setting. What I have seen is a really good relationship between the two teams, a really positive way of resolving any queries, and I'm confident, whilst there's still quite a lot to do, that we can meet that revised deadline together and have something in front of members by the end of March. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I throw it open to other members for questions, I had a point I wanted to make on the pension fund audit, or question I wanted to ask on it. I think in EY's report, it mentions that you're unable to access the detailed models of the actuaries, and so you're kind of coming up with your own estimates as EY. I wondered if those same kind of estimates were being used by other auditors of Berkshire authorities, if they're kind of taking the same approach. And I also wondered what would be the outcome if there was a material difference between EY's estimates and the actuary's assessment.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. A really good question. So this, I think I've mentioned in previous committees that one of the impacts for our 2021 audits has been the revised auditing standard, ISA, on estimates. And that brought in some more rigorous requirements in terms of looking at models. So as auditors, what we have always done is we check the inputs that go into the model and we check the outputs that come out of it. But the sort of black box in the middle is what the actuaries do in terms of the information that they receive. I think we've managed to, in previous years, we've probably managed to avoid having to worry too much about that. But it became clear from discussions with our regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, that they were expecting to see auditors do more in relation to this estimate. We obviously will be able to fix this probably better going forwards into 21-22, but at the time, we were the actuaries and the work that we do had already been progressed. So there is a central review of all of the actuaries that we're able to do. So it impacted all audit firms, and we all had to think about different ways of doing this. In terms of, we don't get to exactly the same figure. But to reassure the committee, we're not working necessarily to a precise materiality level in the numbers, for example, that we report on other elements of the work that we do. We're looking at a range so that if when we recalculate the liability using the same information, we come within plus or minus 2% of the total liability, which, bearing in mind it's many hundreds of thousands of pounds, well, many hundreds of millions of pounds, it gives us a better range to be able to do that. So far, of all the audits that I've been involved with, they have all come in within range, apart from one. And in that one, there was an error that had been made by the actuary. So, and that was then corrected. So I might just have to defer to Stefan. I think we are expecting that report imminently. I think it was just going through its final review checks, and they haven't indicated that we're facing any issues.
Hi, Ellen. Yes, that is correct.
Thanks, Stefan.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes sense to me. Members, any other questions on this? Imogen?
Gosh, I get to go first, do I? Okay. Within this report, we have the valuation of land and building and property, plant and equipment, and investment properties. It's a question that's come from Maria, actually, but we're wondering if there's any material differences in value of the properties that remain unresolved, and how much do they amount to, and the differences that would result in properties being recorded at a lower value than the currently proposed value by council officers, or if it's a higher value. So we're trying to figure out where we are with that.
Thank you. So just in terms of responding to that, I can't give an answer to that right at the moment because that work does actually remain ongoing. So we haven't even got to the stage yet of being able to say what we think the values would be. So the way in which our audit work is completed in relation to valuations is that there are a series of questions and challenges that go backwards and forwards between our audit team and our specialists and your valuations team, and we're still in the process of making sure all of those responses are accurate and have been pulled together. It's fair to say we were hoping to have the report a little bit in advance of this meeting, but there has been some sickness on our side which is delaying it a little bit. We are pushing for that, and at the point at which we do have an initial report, that will give us an indication of whether there are challenges, but at this stage I don't have enough information to be able to give that.
On the point of going concern, we have a lot of, I know that our group have a lot of concerns about the adult social care bill that's heading down our road. And we're just sort of wondering if there are any worries that you have about a going concern, especially with these social care reforms, and any holes they might leave in the council's budgets, and with the government having no plan to fill these holes.
I think officers might want to comment on the latter part of your question, but in terms of our work, what we are most concerned about is not that the council is or is not a going concern. Local government bodies are a going concern unless effectively government tells you you're not. So if there's a plan to remove services or close the council, and obviously that's not the case. Our focus is very much more around the disclosures that management make in relation to the financial position of the authority, which links through to the medium-term financial plans. And so we're looking at, does the authority have a cash flow forecast that has been properly put together, covers all of the areas that we would expect it to do? And we're looking at that out for a period of 12 months effectively from the date where we're expecting to sign. So you could say March 2023. We are obviously mindful of the pressures that are on local councils, but that's possibly more for us, a little bit more in the area of our value for money work. But these are all obviously considerations and discussions that that Graham Ebers and others will be thinking about, and I think Graham wants to comment.
Yeah, thanks for that, Helen. So I guess I'm picking up the point not of whether the council's existence is under question, but more, will we be in section 114 territory? Well, and I'll come to it later in terms of our corporate risk register. We are facing unprecedented times in terms of the unknowns and the size of the unknowns. So it's premature at this stage to say what that is, other than to raise it as a risk. What I can say is, before we get to any talk about a 114, we would do everything we could conceivably do as a council, which includes, of course, the officers and the officers working with the politicians, to downsize, stop, curtail, even dispose, all those things that we can legitimately do, we would do first before moving to, in my view, any form of 114 declaration, because for me that's a last resort where you've effectively said you are not able to resolve the situation yourself, and I am confident that we would, whatever it takes, we would resolve it ourselves. When I say ourselves, I mean officers working with politicians.
Thank you very much. Members, any other questions? No, I can see no one indicating in the room. We don't need to take a vote on that, I guess. We do. OK, we'll take a vote to note the receiving of the report. Can our members in favour of that please show now? OK, thank you very much. That is noted. So now we move on to item number 54, which is the Treasury Management Strategy, which I'm assuming is Graham Cadle. Hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report we're presenting this evening is the Treasury Management Strategy. At the November committee, you were presented with the mid-year 21-22 position. This now reflects requirements for 22-23 and the plan through to 2025. We're asking tonight of the committee to recommend to the council to approve the strategy and associated appendices, and to note the financial impact of the borrowing on the general fund, which is a positive contribution. I've got Mark Thompson here as well, Chief Accountant, to assist with any technical questions. So happy to take any questions.
OK, thank you very much. Members, any questions on the Treasury Management Strategy? Well, I had one. I see no members indicating at the moment. So I'm looking at more out of interest than anything else at page 53 and the graph on the capital programme funding, the bar chart towards the bottom. And there's some SIL and section 106 forward funding and supported borrowing in year 22 and 23, but nothing beyond that. And I was wondering if that is that a fair reflection of the kind of the forward funding of SIL stopping at that kind of point, or will we expect more down the road, do you think?
That is purely at this point the SIL that we are funding in advance of receiving. So it could change going forward, but at the moment that is, as we understand, the plan through to 22-25.
OK, makes sense. So it's not necessarily a hard stop, but it's what's currently planned. OK. Members, anybody else got questions? Imogen.
Yeah, I think my sort of questions are generically sort of, we know we've got a number of capital assets, some of them are investment properties, some of them not. So if we take like the Carnival Pool car park, we know it has lost in value over the last year. And the question I'm seeing is what effect would losses in these property values have on the strategy, and has that been taken into consideration?
So the immediate effect of a loss on the valuation wouldn't affect the general fund. It's an adjustment's made to reflect that, so that the revenue account properly reflects the financial position rather than an accounting position. I don't know particularly about the Carnival car park. I don't know whether Mark's got anything specifically around that that I haven't, but that's certainly the position.
I haven't got anything to add on that. In terms of we will be doing a revaluation exercise as part of our accounts this year, and I suppose in terms of the car park, any losses or gains would be at the point we dispose of an asset in terms of realisable gains or losses. So as far as I'm aware, there's no intention to sell Carnival Pool car park at present.
Would you like to carry on, Imogen? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question that came from Maria. She says local authorities are not charging minimum revenue provision on debt related to certain assets. The evidence is that while some authorities are making minimum revenue provision for commercial investments funded by borrowing, some are still not paying MRP in relation to borrowing associated with investment assets or capital loans. The statutory guidance is clear that financing for investment assets and capital loans require the provision to be made. That's what she's put in my, that's what I put here. So what have we done to prepare for these changes, and what are the implications for the revenue and services? So that's kind of the question.
So the current provision is in line with the regulations, which allows or prescribes for the Chief Financial Officer to make a prudent provision. We are aware that there is a consultation at the moment to change those arrangements. That consultation finishes on the 8th of February, and we're feeding back into that, which includes a number of questions where it's not clear in the guidance what that would include for and what it wouldn't. So, for instance, holidays where investments are not yet being built. So we're keeping a close eye on the developments. We're feeding into the consultation, and obviously, as that becomes clearer, we'll make recalculations around what that means for general fund.
Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the things that seems to be more and more in the news is the rate of inflation, and perhaps looking more into the second and third year of this report, how much are we vulnerable, or how much can it be taken into account that rate of inflation may even remain where it is now, which would be bad enough perhaps.
So thank you, Chair. So in terms of the rate of inflation, it could well have an impact on interest rates, and therefore future borrowing could become more expensive. At the moment, it's not prudent to take out loans we don't need just in case that interest rate grows. So we're working with our external partners to take advice around that future borrowing. But at the moment, the right position is where we are, and as detailed in the strategy. Obviously, the other side of inflation is how it could affect the costs around capital programs and the cost of those sort of things. So obviously, our monitoring is taking that into account. There's contingencies built into a number of the capital programs, and we'll monitor that as that goes through and as that expenditure comes to fruition.
Okay, thank you very much. Imogen, back to you.
Sorry, it's me again. On page 43, it says the council are expecting debt to rise over the next 3 years in line with the capital programme, and is expected to reduce over time as income is generated from these projects and cost savings are realised. We know from the Wokingham Town Centre regeneration that it's long overdue paying up. I believe it's going to start paying up next year. My question is, what if these projects are not paying off in time? Do we have any contingency in there for that? Hopefully that makes sense.
Well, we continue to review the strategy and the approach, depending on the actual spend and depending on the return on investments. And we'd change the approach or the programme as required. I'm not particularly sure on the town centre specifically. I don't know whether, Mark, there's anything.
Yeah, I'd add to the town centre that obviously it's all the income generated is covering the financing costs, so there's no impact to the taxpayer. And as highlighted in the table, we're forecasting that income will be in excess of financing costs over the next couple of years and contribute a return to the general fund.
And if I can just add to that, with all the supported borrowing, where we're undertaking a scheme that pays for the costs of the financing and often generates income in addition to that, we keep those under review, the performance, just like we do any other budget line. So if we find that some are suffering and not achieving their intended return, then we would factor that into future medium-term financial plan submissions so that we had a properly funded budget.
Makes sense. Members, any other questions on this one? No, I can see no one indicating. So, I mean, from my perspective, the report seems pretty familiar, having seen these the last few years, and it's no big departure from that, which is pretty comforting in many ways. So yeah, we move on to the vote. So you've got the recommendations 1 and 2 in here. So I have members, if you support that, show now, please. Okay, thank you very much. Any abstentions? Any votes against? Okay, and I'll cast the deciding vote as chairman in favour of the report. Thank you very much. So that's item 54 done. So we move on to item number 55, which is the corporate risk register. Andrew, I think that's for you to introduce.
Yes, if I could introduce it, Chair, and then I'll hand over to Graham, who's here from the corporate leadership team, to talk specifically about risks in his area, and obviously as Chief Financial Officer to focus on that first risk, the finance risk, which does also run through some of the other risks in the register. So the recommendation before you this evening, as usual with this item, is to consider and note the risks and mitigating actions of the Council's corporate risks as detailed in the attached risk register, which starts at page 89. Just in terms of sort of changes since last time, so there's no new risks. What I have got in the update is follow-up of 3 areas that were raised at the last meeting. So firstly, climate emergency. You asked for more detail, more description around that particular risk, and you'll see that in the report at page 84. Just picking up as well the question raised by Imogen under the minutes of the last meeting. So the internal audit of climate emergency is underway. The internal audit team are working in collaboration with PwC on this really important audit, and we expect to be able to report the findings of that audit to the next meeting of the committee. But the query was raised around carbon accounting, and we are looking at options in terms of the 22-23 internal audit plan to provide assurance around that particular specialist area. What I would say is this is quite new for local authorities. Certainly talking to PwC in terms of the internal auditing profession, we're at a quite embryonic stage, but as I say, I will be presenting some proposals to the next meeting around how we can take that forward. Just before I move on from climate emergency, though, I just want to draw the committee's attention to the news that came out last week from Climate Emergency UK, which is another source of independent assurance for the committee, where they ranked Wokingham's Climate Emergency Action Plan as 8th in the country amongst single-tier authorities. So I think that is an important update to note in terms of providing assurance around that particular risk. The second area was around adult social care supplier risk. And just to update the committee on the mitigations, the work that the council's been doing since you last met on the 30th of November, supporting the care sector through December and January. But you've got a slightly more detailed description of what that particular risk covers. And then thirdly, risk number 12, which is the high needs block. And again, Graham may pick up on this in his presentation around finance risks, but there was a specific query around the delay around Winnersh Farm School and the impact that may have. I understand the school will be opening in 2023. The impact in terms of the specific high needs block risk, it's being quantified at the moment, so I don't have sort of precise details around that. But that's something that we'll be keeping under close monitoring over the next few weeks and months as we move forward through the Risk Champions group and through the corporate leadership team. Just before I finish my introduction, just on page 89, you've got the summary, the matrix of all the risks, and for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you'll notice that there are 2 number 12s on there, just to say that the one that's in the high risk category is the high needs block risk, not the pandemic risk. So apologies for that error in the presentation. I'm going to pause there and hand over, with your permission, Chair, to Graham to pick up the risks in his particular area.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Just first of all, building on from Andrew's reference to the Climate Emergency UK and the nationwide assessment of all local authorities' climate emergency plans. Absolutely, we were scored 8th in the country, scored 79%. And in the particular strand of governance and development, we were actually the first. So that's where the Climate Emergency Action Plan demonstrates clear commitment at leadership level. Actions are assigned to individual officers and there is a clear commitment to deliver them on time. And that scored 21 out of 21 on that particular theme. I only reference that, well, not just because it's good news or reassuring to know that we are the number 1 on that, but that is particularly around governance, which of course is an important consideration of this committee. And as Andrew said, that just supplements the other work that's going on, which includes our own internal audit. As for the other areas in terms of adding to what Andrew's already said, I think I'll just go into a bit more detail on the financial risks. And I appreciate it's been said before at this committee, and I'm sure elsewhere, is, well, why don't we do the work to make the risk disappear from being a high risk? Well, the nature of finance in local government means we keep attending to the work and the risk, and then new risks arise. And there are many risks that I have set out in my CFO report that was first submitted publicly to January Executive, and it will form a part of the MTFP that will be presented to Council. And there is a significant amount of unknowns in terms of their impact. So all we can do is keep them under close review, keep doing all the actions we can, which includes, for example, making representations to other bodies, being around the right tables, putting whatever pressure we can to bear to make the case for Wokingham known. That may be successful, but it may not be successful. And either way, we still do not know the true impact. But just to outline these, and as I said, they are articulated in the CFO report. Already referenced tonight, we have inflation. We don't know what inflation will be throughout the course of the next year and beyond. We don't know whether things will stabilise, but all we can do, and again, as already mentioned, is try to provide sensibly for the impact of inflation, both in the context of the individual schemes and a corporate contingency, which we've done. It's a very difficult thing with all of these, but take inflation is I could take an extremely risk-averse approach, which means we put loads and loads of money in for safety and contingency, but the impact of that would be detrimental to the money available for services, and services would have to reduce. So I think when we talk about financial risk, it's easy to de-risk by just simply lumping in money for contingencies and reserves. But every time you do that, you take money away from other services, and you may well, by doing that, mean that you invoke actions that means services closed, that you then find out you didn't need to make all of that contingency, and then I would take the view that I'd acted irresponsibly. So it's always a tension in dealing with financial risks of having a sufficiency of safeguard, but not an over sufficiency of safeguard. And I think we've struck that balance as best we can. So moving on to some of the other risks, again mentioned tonight, the adult social care NHS reform. This doesn't actually start till October 23, although we will of course need to start onboarding staff to deal with the implementation from October 23. So the costs will be felt earlier. Also, you would have heard with regard to this that because it's been mentioned in other public forums, that this could be well over £20 million per annum impact on Wokingham Borough Council. And of course, there are so many unknowns in this area, and the figures are startlingly large. However, what I will say is that figure is not a figure that would kick in on year one. That would be a figure of the full felt impact of the reform as we know it, with the best knowledge we have right now. So that is more likely to be in 5 years' time than certainly in year 1, 2 or 3. So there will be a graduated impact to this, and of course in that graduated impact that will be felt across the country, particularly in the south of England where self-funders are higher, and there will be an enormous amount of lobbying, representations put to the various bodies in control to ensure that funding was allocated appropriately in accordance to how the impact was felt. So I think even though we say now that this is the impact and this is quite scary, this isn't an immediate thing, and there is an awful lot that can happen to influence in order to enact change for the better and reduce this risk. So the funding from central government will be important in this, and we know that there was an awful lot of money that was raised through the national insurance that provided for the impact of this, and some of the dynamic in this is that the NHS received a significant tranche. Whether they continue to receive such a significant tranche is an important factor, because it's that steering of the money to the NHS meant that there was less available for local authorities, and I'm sure that will be a particular issue that will be under close review. Another area to mention in terms of financial risk and uncertainty is the local government finance settlement itself, which we received for 1 year only, the year being 22-23. We were hoping on a longer and expecting a longer term settlement because that has been promised for some years. A longer term settlement is helpful because it gives us financial security, which helps our financial planning. However, we have only 1 year of clarity, and then there will be work ongoing throughout this calendar year, which will be with the intention of designing a new methodology for the allocation of local government finance. So that's effectively how the cake is divvied up around the country. A particular concern in this regard is that there is as you'll be aware, a strong levelling up agenda. So a strong levelling up agenda informing a new local government finance settlement is not likely to be particularly favourable for Wokingham. However, Wokingham does have its needs and therefore should continue to make its case to ensure that it doesn't get disadvantagedly affected in the allocation system. We are already, of course, the lowest funded unitary authority in the country, so we come from a low base, and we need to keep making the representations of just because we have less deprivation than maybe some other areas of the country, we still have a high basic cost of service delivery. We still have very significant challenges in our statutory areas, particularly adults and children's and waste collection disposal. They're statutory services we must provide, and we are not immune from high costs and rising costs in these areas. The MRP consultation has already been discussed. We don't know the outcome of that. But I do know that we've tried to be prudent in our approach and of course followed the Prudential Code in that regard. It's not yet clear what the outcome is, but it could require us to pay back debt quicker or provide for the repayment of debt quicker than we currently do. But as Graham has already said, the consultation is underway and we can't preempt the outcome of that. I think they're the key areas I'd like to bring to your attention. Like I say, they are laid out in the CFO report and they provide an important financial context to this council going forward. So we are in a strong financial position, especially when compared with the position of local authorities around the country. And this wasn't just us saying this was the SIPFA Resilience Index scored us in the top 20, and a subsequent assessment by SIPFA showed that all general fund indicators moved in a positive direction. The only negative indicator in all of their assessment was HRA reserves reducing, which was is still safe, but it was just reducing. So we have reason to feel confident, but also we have reason to be extremely cautious as we move forward over the coming medium term, as in next year and on 5 years plus.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it was a really informative presentation for the committee. Thank you very much for that. I'll throw it open to questions now. I'll start off with a question actually. On monitoring performance against budgets, obviously us as councils would be aware that we get the revenue monitoring reports and capital monitoring reports that go to executive periodically. But I wondered, within the internal operations of the council, what other kind of processes are in place to monitor performance against budgets beyond those public reports?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You're right. Effectively, the publicly reported figures, they are like the top of the pyramid, and therefore they are highest level and less frequently produced. And as you move down the pyramid, you get more and more frequency and greater extent of data and detail. Some of our financial monitoring is on a daily basis, can be on a daily basis. We have BWO, Business World On, which provides us the IT infrastructure to do that. So it's live, things are put on and you can recount live. Others can be on daily, others weekly, but at minimum, we provide a monthly cut of where we are so that we can see the overall council picture. And this is held by the organisation, and obviously all of our corporate management team, directors, etc. are aware of all that. So various levels in various frequency depending on the audience, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, any other questions to Graham? Shahid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the team for the report as well. I think it's very clearly laid out. I think it's easier to digest the information as well. I think that's really helpful. My question is regarding the risk-free workforce due to inability to recruit and retain sufficient permanent staff. Obviously, whatever we're doing, all the work which we do in the council, the people are basically the ones who formulate strategy. They're the one implement strategy, and if you don't have the right workforce, right, that is a huge risk. And under the current climate, obviously, there's been even more, I understand, severe shortages in certain areas. So how confident we are that we will be able to implement our HR policies to recruit the right people? Are we confident that those policies are in place? Are we confident that we will be able to deliver the programs which we intend to do over the next year or two? Because they are the backbone of the whole what we do. And how confident we are we'll be able to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Shahid. It's a good one. First of all, I think it's important to recognise we will always have challenges in terms of recruitment, and we will always have a level of interims, agencies and what have you. It's the natural way of the world. I would never say we would move to an organisation that's 100% permanent staff, and actually bringing in interims, agency staff, etc. adds great value for particular projects, brings in new expertise or supplements expertise and new insight. So we have around this table here Graham Cadle, who's helping us and brings in the knowledge he has from the various places he works. So it has a value. To have a churn in staff, to have a degree of agency and interim, it is not a bad thing per se, but it's about managing that to an acceptable level. And the approach to it is multifaceted. So it's not money is a factor, of course. You have to recruit and pay at the right rates to attract and retain. But it's a whole host of other things as well about being an organisation that's a good organisation to work for, an aspirational organisation, one that's motivating, one that you feel you can add value to. So there's a whole host of things. This is all part of the work that is being undertaken by Chris, who's our AD in HR, who's taking forward this very agenda. It sits very strongly with a programme that I'm sure you've heard of called Workplace Reimagined, which is really about the new organisation of the future. Which is very much about the people we need, to keep, and the type of culture that we need in order to deliver the services for our residents in the most effective way. And we have strong aspirations about being best in class, the best at what we do, and that's all part of attracting staff, attracting the best and keeping the best. There are a whole host of policies that need to sit behind all that, in terms of how we go about our business, how we work in a hybrid working environment, how we interface with ourselves, with the customer, accessibility, localities and all that consideration. And of course, terms and conditions, which isn't just about money, but it's about flexibility, about attracting a different, say a wide mix in terms of demographic of society, in terms of age, but also other types of backgrounds. We know that best organisations, when they have a great mix of staff across all the various sectors of the community, that they perform well. So it's about those inclusiveness, equalities, and a good mix and diversity. And we know that is really important for the workforce going forward. So the answer, I suppose, in short, is that is a key part of our work. It's not a quick fix. It sits strongly with the Workplace Reimagined programme, and it's a key piece of work that our AD of HR is taking forward. And we know this to be a critical issue to address and get right, because, as you said, we are in many ways only as good as our workforce.
Thank you. Imogen, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is regarding the SEND school in Winnish Farm. Do we have any idea how much the delay is costing us?
The reason why I'm a little bit concerned about giving figures, because we're actually in negotiations with the DfE to try to secure appropriate recompense for the impact of this delay. So I don't want to but I say high level, it could be at the tune of £5 million, and we will see what we can do to manage down those costs through alternative cost-efficient places. But it's true to say it will have an impact, and of course it doesn't help in an already difficult, challenging situation whereby our DSG budgets, the high needs block, driven by the high needs block, is in the region of £10 million forecast overspend in terms of its cumulative budget, and it continues to increase by about £3 million per year. The fact that we don't have our own provision in the time that we thought will not be helping us at all. Self-sufficiency and provision within the borough is a key part of the mitigation of this escalating concern. I will say, in terms of the escalating concern, we are not alone. This is a nationally felt issue which comes from, I think, a fairly commonly held view that the system is broke, in that the rules and regulations around how we receive the funding, what we can do with the funding, our flexibilities to do anything to stem the tide are limited, but we will continue to do all we can do. Some deficits are in the region of up to £100 million.
I'm just sort of wanting to say, well, yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you're chasing it up, because obviously there is a cost, but there isn't more than just a monetary cost, which is easier to quantify. There is a human cost in shunting these children all over the place. We're much better to have a school locally, and I think it's a bit off that the DfE have delayed our funding for this, and it's costing us here in Wokingham the money, but the government's taken the break on it, which I think is a bit wrong. But I'll leave that one with you.
Well, I will agree with you're absolutely right. This isn't just about the numbers. Of course, in my role, I'm very focused on the finances, but you're absolutely right. Self-provision not only will be a partial solution to our financial challenges, but it's a much better experience for those in the community that utilise the services. It's much better to receive the care and support needed that our vulnerable need locally than having to seek provisions further afield where the support mechanisms are not there in the same way as they are locally.
Okay, thank you. Embers, any other questions? Ian.
On the climate emergency, one of the behaviour changes required is to increase use of public transport. Yet the use of public transport at the moment is somewhat down on pre-pandemic levels. And one of the responses to that from South Western Railway has been to reduce services, particularly in peak time. Bus operators potentially could turn around and say we cannot sustain the existing routes or the existing levels of service without further contribution from the local authority. And there, as far as I'm aware, is no government move to account for that. Has that been factored in to the risk level for climate emergency?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say this is a big emerging issue for the council, not just us. Obviously, this will again be a nationally felt concern. This is the confidence that, well, both the confidence of the general public getting back to use public transport post even during the pandemic. Also, with the consideration that people have found it possible to do their work from home and therefore no longer need the transport journeys that they used to undertake pre-pandemic. So those two, I think the confidence of feeling safe in public transport and even the need to transport themselves anymore is an issue, a national issue. And I'm sure that there will be strong government considerations about how public transport is supported and arranges itself going forward. This is going to be an issue for Wokingham, and we need to keep it under close review and work with partners and work with the government to resolve. The impact on climate emergency one will be beneficial and one will be detrimental, in that those who have learnt to and enjoy working from home and can work from home well, that will obviously continue to help the climate emergency agenda. But obviously those now choosing to use cars as opposed to buses obviously will be detrimental. You're absolutely right in your point about behavioural change. Our role, we are not controllers or instructors of what our community do, but our role will be to try to do what we can to influence and provide opportunity for those more climate friendly ways of travelling, whether that is through electric vehicles or cycles or cycleways or other forms of more environmentally forms of travel.
Imogen.
Sorry, me again. I think it fits under number one, the budget and financial resilience, but I know we've got a concern about how costs of construction are affecting parts of the capital programme and other work that the council may be doing. And I'm sort of wondering where that would fit in terms of our risk.
Sorry, Imogen, was that about the inflationary pressures, were you saying?
I'm talking about construction costs.
Oh, okay. So construction costs, yes. So
Yeah.
increasing construction costs is part of our inflationary considerations. So when we were initially faced with those rather alarming increases back probably the summer last year, we undertook a review of our current capital programme and the next year's 3 years formative capital programme, so what we had compiled at that point in time, and we made sure that the specific schemes that needed inflation provision was put there, and we undertook let's say an overall assessment to provide a central contingency, which we've beefed up considerably to enable that to cover the cost of these escalating prices. What I would say is it wasn't as universally felt as I initially thought. So in certain types of projects were immune because the contract was already in place. Others were immune because they were part of a framework agreement that allowed flexibility of downsizing within, for example, programs of maintenance and what have you. So you just cut your cloth where you need to, if indeed you need to. So it came down to specific building costs, whereby we felt those costs actually they would be somewhat higher. So we have, to the best of our knowledge, factored in sufficient provision for construction cost inflation across the capital programme, both this year and the next 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much. I see no other members indicating. Oh, Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking again on the financial risks, and with our, well, I think we could view as sensible levels of reserves, are we in a much stronger position than many other local authorities? And so therefore, will we see those local authorities in a worse situation today and in succeeding months show the stress before it hits us and alert us?
Yeah, thank you, Angus. Without doubt, there are a very large number of authorities up and down the country in considerably worse state than us in terms of financial resilience. A factor of resilience is the size of reserves, general fund reserves, but also another factor is other types of reserves that we hold. We are in a relatively strong position as a result of years of good, sound financial management and prudent practices. And I am conscious that other authorities will feel that the impact of unforeseen cost overruns, inflation or otherwise, they will reveal themselves much more quickly than us, which is effectively what the SIP for Resilience toolkit tells us.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that concludes the questions. I see no one else indicating. So we move to a vote now on to note the report. Can I ask members to show if they support noting the report? Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, thank you very much, Graham, for taking part of your evening to come join us and give that report. I think it was very, very informative and a good session.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So here Here we go on to item number 56, which is on the independent member of the Audit Committee. I think, Andrew, this one's for you to introduce again.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So you'll recall as a committee that last September you undertook a self-assessment against SIT for best practice for local authority audit committees. And one of the areas that you identified was to consider the benefits of appointing an independent member to the audit committee. So this report sets out the benefits, gives you some more detail, and the recommendations that are in front of you are to firstly review and discuss the proposal to co-opt an independent member onto the committee. Secondly, if appropriate, to approve the independent member role profile, which is Appendix 1 in your report. And then thirdly, should you be minded to move forward with that proposal, to recommend, I won't read out all the detail in the recommendation there, but to recommend to council your decision of this evening. What I would just point out is that since September, we've had the Corporate Peer Challenge, and this was one of the areas that they highlighted to us that the Audit Committee should consider this point. There is a view that this would help to strengthen governance. And I would point out to you in terms of paragraph 14 in the report itself, that says the primary considerations when considering audit committee membership should be maximising the committee's knowledge base and skills, being able to demonstrate objectivity and independence, and having a membership that will work together. And as I say, the SIT for best practice does indicate quite strongly that this an appointment of an independent member with those right skills as set out in the role profile would actually help to improve the overall effectiveness of the audit committee. One point that I do recall came out last September as one of the queries was whether this appointment would have voting rights, and I can confirm that there wouldn't be voting rights with this. The independent member would be there to contribute to the committee, to advise, to share their skills and knowledge and experience, but they would not have voting rights on the committee itself. So I'll pause there at that stage, Chairman, but very happy to take any questions that the committee has got this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Imogen, I'll throw it to you first.
Sorry, guys. I sort of want to know, what the job description for this person would be as such, and how are they going to be assessed? Like, so if they're not turning up for meetings and things, do we give them the £1,000 or not? How do we, if we needed to, if they needed to be, they weren't showing up or they weren't delivering on what we were expecting them to do, how is that going to be managed? Hopefully that makes sense.
It does make sense, and it's a good question. To be fair, it wouldn't be a problem that I'd envisage as long as we have a good, robust selection process in the first instance. I think it is about clarity of what's expected of the role. What I would share is my experience of the independent members that the council already has with regard to standards work. And I think all of those three appointments have been very effective. We've got three individuals there who've been very committed, and we've certainly not had that problem with the independent appointments that we've already got in the council. But we would absolutely, as part of that selection process, make sure that there's full clarity in what's expected in terms of that individual.
Do we pay the members of the standards committee, the independent members?
Yes, there's an allowance which is at the same level as what is proposed for this appointment.
Okay, I'm just wondering if if people are not turning up, not contributing, how do we say, okay, we need somebody else to do this role? How are they assessed?
Well, again, as I say, it's not an issue that we've had to date. I think probably as part of the appointment process for this one, if that's a concern of the committee, then we'd look to build something much more specific into the appointment process to make sure that the standards that are expected are clearly laid out, and the consequences of not meeting those standards are also clearly laid out.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that seems sensible. Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. Two points. One, would it be likely that if we were putting together a job description, if we did go ahead, that there are many other local authorities that the experience we could get as to how that has been worded? The second point is on paragraph 7 on page 108, there are 3 bullet points. And whereas the first and the third I can understand and see, I've got a little difficulty with the second, the middle one, to reinforce the political neutrality and independence of the committee. One, I have slight difficulty with that wording in the first place with this committee. But secondly, I don't see how necessarily an independent member would reinforce that.
Okay, I think that those words, in terms of that second bullet, they actually come from the SITFA guidance. So that's where they're taken from. I think what SITFA are conveying by that is to help to ensure that the audit committee focuses on the overall governance and the assurance arrangements for the authority in as apolitical a way as possible. But as I say, the source of that is SITFA itself, in terms of their experience, that it helps to bring that neutrality about. And your first point, Angus, about the role description, the job description, what you've got in that appendix this evening is based on the documentation that other local authorities have used to appoint their independent member to an audit committee.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add one thing from my side. So on that bullet 2 around reinforcing the political neutrality, I personally would see that as a benefit from doing this. I think that the tone of the debate in the audit committee is generally pretty good, certainly compared to full councils and various other committees. But I also see it in the standards committee where there's independent members, and I'd say that has a more kind of neutral and open feel to it. And I'd hope that this kind of move would push that committee in that direction as well, which I think is kind of the intention of the committee being in place. Shahid.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just back off what Imogen was saying, that we need to set some standards, what we expect of the independent person. But also, if they do not perform, then making sure we clearly lay out that the audit committee have the authority to take them out as well, or appoint them, or what's the word? De-appoint them, or if ever the situation arises. But you don't know what's happening in the future. But I think all circumstances, and I think there needs to be much more clarity around that. So they know what we expect of them, but also we know what we can expect from them as well.
Yeah, I'll certainly take that point forward, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, anybody got any other points to raise on this? Angus.
Sorry to come back, Chairman, but just looking at the recommendations, because this appointment, if it were made, carries an allowance, would that need to be specifically mentioned as part of the recommendation?
It is in the report under financial implications, and it would be met out of existing budgets. So it's not additional budget. But if the committee felt it would be helpful, we could add that specific into the recommendation, so it's fully transparent to council.
Yeah, I don't see the harm. I don't see the harm of including that specifically. So I'll support that.
Yeah, it was more a question. I'm not necessarily pushing it, but I just wondered procedurally whether it was advisable to have it. But see what the committee thinks.
Andrew, do you want to come back on that at all, or is that?
Well, I was just going to say, Chairman, yeah, procedurally it is within existing budget, so it wouldn't need to be specifically in the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And we're recommending something to council anyway. We're not spending money as a committee per se, so I think that's probably fine. Shahid? No? Okay. Anybody else got any points to raise on this item? No? See silence around the room. I think, yeah, from my perspective, I'm supportive of this. I think for the political neutrality point I mentioned earlier, and also just get some diverse skill sets in here as well, because we're not risk management experts, we're not all financial experts or anything like that. So I think to get some extra knowledge in the room to help with the discussion on the various reports that we see and in conducting our duties, I think it's a healthy thing. So, Shahid, yeah.
Remember, Andrew, is there also a time limit as well? Do we appoint them for a certain period, or is it just open-ended?
The appointment would be for 5 years.
Is it in the report somewhere?
It should be in the report.
Maybe I missed it somewhere. If it's not, then I think it should be clearly.
If it's not in the report, Chairman, we'll make sure that it's minuted that the appointment would be for 5 years. But taking your point, Shahid, and Imogen's point, we'll make sure that it's clear as well. The performance standards question and what would happen if the independent member didn't perform.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Members, I think no one's got anything else to raise, so I think we can move to the recommendations and take a vote on that. So in front of you on page 107, can I see members showing support of the recommendations? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. That's carried. And that, I believe, is the end of the agenda, unless I've missed something. Nope, that's the end of the agenda. So thank you very much for your time, and see you all in March. Good night.